Welcome, everyone. I'm excited to have you here today. Today, we're going to explore a very important topic: 10 questions you must answer before marriage, questions that most people often overlook. We'll cover key areas that can make or break your future together. So, stay tuned as we uncover these essential questions to help you build a stronger, more informed foundation for your marriage. Most people like to think they can easily tell the difference between real intimacy and just imagined closeness. But for those of us who grew up without a secure attachment, whether through emotional neglect, abuse, or unpredictable home environments, the mind often develops a kind of survival strategy called fantasy bonding. These are inner, invisible relationships that feel incredibly real. They can seem powerful, intimate, even emotional. But the key point here is that they are not genuine human connections. Instead, they are coping mechanisms designed to protect a wounded child. That child learned early on that closeness might mean danger, inconsistency, or even abandonment. Tonight, I want to focus on two specific forms of these fantasy bonds that often stem from complex trauma: limerence and fantasy bonding itself. These are patterns rooted in illusion, and they can quietly sabotage our ability to form real intimacy, to be authentic, and to grow emotionally. Recognizing these patterns is crucial because they keep us trapped in a false sense of closeness, preventing us from experiencing true connection and healing. When attachment wounds turn into fantasy, it's a complex process rooted in our very biology. Children are born with a fundamental need to attach. Love isn't just a nice thing, it's essential for survival. But what happens when the caregivers who are supposed to meet those needs are inconsistent, overwhelmed, emotionally unavailable, or even abusive or neglectful? The child's deepest instinct remains: I must connect. That drive is powerful and innate. However, alongside it, another instinct begins to form, an instinct that says connection can be dangerous. This creates a real internal conflict. I long for intimacy, but I'm also terrified of it. This contradiction, desiring closeness but fearing it, sets the stage for what we call fantasy-based connection. Children who experience ongoing relational wounds often develop feelings of shame, believing it's my fault they don't love me. They develop a fear of abandonment and even a fear of authenticity, thinking, if they knew the real me, they would leave. This leads to emotional self-isolation, where the longing for connection persists, but only in ways that feel safe and manageable. Because real intimacy feels threatening, the mind begins to create simulated intimacy, relationships that exist entirely inside the imagination. So, in essence, these children and later adults may turn to fantasy as a way to fulfill their deep need for connection, while protecting themselves from the pain of real vulnerability. This process highlights how attachment wounds can transform our natural instincts into internal worlds of illusion, shaping how we relate for years to come. Let's talk about limerence, which is often the first and most intense form of a fantasy bond. Now, it's important to understand limerence is not love. It's not true connection. Instead, it's an obsessive, involuntary state of infatuation that's driven by a few key factors: dopamine, which fuels that intense excitement; fantasy projection, where we create idealized images of the person; longing for reciprocation, craving that mutual feeling; and fear of abandonment, which keeps us hooked. Now, some core features of limerence include intrusive thoughts. You just can't stop thinking about this person. They take over your mind, even when you're trying to focus elsewhere. Emotional dependency is another big one. Just a single text, a glance, or comment can send your emotions soaring or crashing down. You tend to idealize the person, ignoring red flags or dismissing friends' concerns because you see only what you want to see. You also start searching for signs. Every emoji, tone, or look becomes a clue, and you're constantly trying to confirm whether they feel the same way. It's almost like addiction. You crave their presence, their photos, their attention, and you need that hit to feel okay. And of course, there's a lot of fantasy projection. You envision a future together that often has no real foundation in reality. Ultimately, limerence gives us a powerful emotional high, but its main purpose is pretty simple. It creates the illusion of intimacy without requiring us to be truly vulnerable. It's an intense, often overwhelming experience that keeps us hooked on the idea rather than the real person. Let's talk about fantasy bonding, which is a really interesting concept introduced by Dr. Robert Firestone. It's a kind of defensive attachment pattern where someone convinces themselves that they are close to another person, even when the relationship is actually empty, distant, or even abusive. This creates the illusion of intimacy, but in reality, there's very little genuine connection. Unlike limerence, which is driven by romantic obsession, fantasy bonding can happen in many types of relationships: marriages, long-term partnerships, parent-child relationships, or codependent dynamics. It's quite pervasive and often sneaky because it disguises emotional disconnection as closeness. So, what does fantasy bonding actually look like? Well, one common sign is mistaking routine for true intimacy, like thinking, "We live together, so we must be close," when in fact, there might be no real emotional sharing. People also substitute roles, habits, or control for vulnerability, rather than opening up honestly. Sometimes, individuals idealize harmful relationships to avoid facing abandonment or abuse, which can be a way of clinging to an illusion of stability. Another key aspect is losing your own identity, merging into the other person just to maintain that sense of closeness. And often, honest communication is avoided altogether. Instead, there might be a feeling of emptiness, numbness, or feeling unseen, yet the person stays stuck because they can't imagine leaving or confronting the truth. The core message of fantasy bonding is this. On the surface, it says, "We are close," but underneath, the reality is quite different. The truth is, we don't really know each other, we don't see each other, we're not truly emotionally connected. This pattern often stems from avoidant attachment styles. When emotional honesty feels unsafe, people create what looks like a pseudo-relationship to avoid the fear of abandonment. It's a defense mechanism, creating a false sense of closeness to protect oneself from vulnerability and pain. So let's explore how trauma shapes these two patterns, limerence and fantasy bonding. Both of these actually stem from the same childhood wound, which is a desperate need for love that was never fully met. When we're young and that need isn't fulfilled, our minds adapt in ways that help us survive. For example, we learn it's safer to imagine love rather than expect it, because real love might feel uncertain or risky. We also tend to connect through fantasy instead of risking rejection in real relationships. It becomes easier to idolize someone rather than let them see who we truly are, and creating a mental relationship feels safer than asking for genuine intimacy. Our minds build stories, fantasies, idealized characters, and imagined closeness. These are all ways to cope when the real world feels unpredictable, painful, or unsafe. It's really important to recognize that fantasy bonds are not signs of immaturity. They are actually survival strategies that our minds develop to protect us from emotional pain. Understanding this helps us see how these patterns are rooted in childhood experiences and how they influence our adult relationships. Let's talk about some signs you might be experiencing limerence. First, you find yourself replaying interactions with that person over and over in your mind. It's like your brain can't let go of those moments. Your emotions become really dependent on whether they give you attention or not, making your mood swing based on small signals from them. You might also idealize them, seeing only their good qualities and ignoring any flaws, which can cloud your judgment. Overanalyzing every little detail of your interactions is common too. You're trying to decode what they really think or feel. Physical symptoms can also appear, like your heart racing, feeling anxious, or experiencing a rush of dopamine that makes everything feel intense. Craving constant reassurance is another key sign. You need to hear or see proof that they feel the same way. And it's easy to get lost in fantasizing about a perfect relationship, often far beyond what's realistic. Lastly, if you dislike ambiguity and need clear proof of their feelings, it's a strong indicator you might be in limerence. All of these signs connect to the overall theme that limerence consumes your thoughts and emotions, often blinding you to reality. Recognizing these patterns is a step toward understanding your experience better. Let's talk about some common signs of fantasy bonding. First, You might find yourself confusing routine with closeness. That means you may think just going through the motions together equals intimacy. Next, you might idealize someone who actually treats you poorly, believing they're the only one who can give you love, even if it's unhealthy. You may also avoid vulnerability and emotional honesty, keeping your true feelings hidden to maintain a sense of safety. Sometimes, people lose their sense of identity within the relationship, blending their interests and personalities to avoid conflict. This can make you feel like you're not really yourself anymore. Relying on the relationship for your sense of identity or safety is another warning sign, placing your entire self-worth or security in the relationship rather than within yourself. You might also merge interests and personalities to steer clear of disagreements, which prevents authentic connection. Staying in harmful or dysfunctional dynamics out of fear of abandonment is a big red flag. It keeps you stuck in patterns that aren't good for you. And finally, you often can't express your real needs, emotions, or boundaries because you're afraid of how the other person will react or what it might mean for the relationship. All of these signs are interconnected and point to a deeper issue: the way we sometimes mistake these patterns for love or closeness, which is why recognizing them is so important for breaking free and building healthier relationships. Let's talk about the tragic cost of fantasy bonds. Often, we see these bonds as safe, as protective shields that keep us from facing risk, truth, or rejection. But the reality is, they come with some serious long-term consequences that can be devastating. For starters, they can lead to chronic loneliness, even when we're surrounded by people. Because these bonds prevent us from forming genuine, secure attachments, we might find ourselves stuck in unhealthy patterns of relationships over and over again. This cycle can cause emotional numbness, making it hard to feel authentic connection or even to recognize our own feelings. Over time, we might also lose our sense of identity as we get caught up in avoiding vulnerability and hiding behind these fantasy connections. Stagnation and emptiness become common because we're essentially wasting years, sometimes decades, in what I call near relationships, where there's no real intimacy or depth. The sad truth is, you can spend 20, 30, even 40 years caught in these fantasy bonds, never truly experiencing the intimacy and connection you deeply crave. Recognizing this is crucial because it highlights how these bonds, while seemingly safe, can trap us in a cycle that prevents us from reaching genuine fulfillment. Healing from limerence and fantasy bonding is absolutely possible, but it does take courage. The first step is awareness, being able to recognize the patterns, noticing where fantasy might be replacing genuine vulnerability. Once you're aware, trauma work and therapy become essential tools. They help you address attachment wounds, shame, neglect, and those early emotional experiences that shaped your patterns. Learning to connect safely is also critical. Start small, building non-romantic relationships where you can practice honesty, set boundaries, and be open with people you trust. This creates a foundation of genuine connection. From there, you can gradually build authentic intimacy, understanding that healthy relationships take time, patience, and a willingness to be transparent and emotionally present. Rebuilding your identity is another vital step. Many of us have lived so much of our lives inside our heads or in fantasy that we lose touch with who we really are. It's important to rediscover yourself outside of those illusions. And yes, grieving the lost years is part of the process. Many realize they've spent decades in their own head instead of truly connecting with others. It's heartbreaking, but it's also a necessary step. Accept it, grieve it, and then choose to move forward. Remember, healing is possible at any age, whether you're in your 50s, 60s, or beyond. It's never too late. Now, regarding final thoughts, fantasy bonds are not a sign of weakness. They are actually a brilliant survival mechanism of a wounded child, a way to feel safe in an unsafe world. But as adults, those illusions no longer serve us. They can trap us instead. To truly break free, we need to choose courage over illusion, vulnerability over safety, and real love over imagined connection. Because the life you want, the deep intimacy you crave, that's only available in the real world, not in fantasy. And embracing that truth is the first step toward genuine connection and healing.